Al mundo de boxeo entré por mi papá. Él era boxeador profesional y yo de chiquito, él me subió al ring. Hasta ahora, gracias a Dios, nunca perdí.
I know where I'm at in this world. I am in competition with myself. I'm already at the top. At the end of the day, we're gonna run into drama.
Que le he ganado a boxeadores buenos, le he ganado a Errol Spence, también le gané a Sergey Derevianchenko.
Watch my opponent. He's a stalker. He comes, he throws a lot of punches. I have to go in there and figure out how to take Brian Castano away from being Brian Castano.
Ser campeón mundial creo que es la meta de todo boxeador. Se me dio la oportunidad.
You know, to fight for the 4-belt era, undisputed championship, this fight does cement my legacy.
Es la oportunidad de mi vida y no la voy a dejar pasar.
July 17th, I'm going to put my hands to use.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to make these fights official. Hello, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas. That is Brian Campbell, and welcome to the Charlo versus Castaño weigh-ins. We will go to San Antonio live in just a moment, but let's get things started with a bit of a preview. All right, Brian, we are waiting for the fighters to step on the scale, but we are in for a triple header tomorrow. It kicks off live on Showtime, regular Showtime. It's a big fight, but it's just regular old Showtime. No pay-per-view necessary for folks who want to watch. And in that main event, we'll talk about all three fights, but in that main event, Jermell Charlo versus Brian Castaño, the winner will have the undisputed title for the first time a fighter will have done this in this weight category, 154 pounds BC. Any expectations for the weigh-in, what they might look at when they're facing off against one another? How big are the stakes here when you think about this fight?
The stakes are absolutely massive. Like, this is a big-time Showtime Championship boxing night with a big fight on top. You mentioned it, first 4-belt championship at super welterweight in this 4-belt modern era of the past 20 or so years, looking to become just the 6th male fighter to unify all 4 titles in this era. I want to see how the fighters have prepared, how they look on the scales, and then even more importantly, how they look across from each other when they stare down for the final one, the last time they will see each other before Saturday night's fights. Both are champions. They've got one loss between them, and of course that was Jermell Charlo to Tony Harrison in a disputed title fight in 2018 that, oh, by the way, he avenged by knockout the following year. Castano, your unbeaten WBO champion from Argentina, just one draw on his record and a banger against the great Erislandy Lara. Both fighters are here for legacy, and for Jermell Charlo, who's a big-time superstar on the verge of knocking and getting into that pound-for-pound club among the elite of the sport. You know, this may end up being the defining fight of his journey up to this point. So, Luke, no shortage of stakes here, but we're going to see one more time when they look into each other's eyes to raise the intensity level ahead of what should be a banger Saturday night.
It was interesting, though, they've not necessarily had a ton of personal rivalry. They're both chasing gold. They're both chasing legacy, but they don't necessarily have a ton of animosity for each other, do they?
No, and that can sometimes be a rarity in a Charlo fight for either of the great twin brothers. Jermell Charlo, your WBC middleweight champion, or Jermell here, your unified champion at 154. Both love to walk around with big chips on their shoulders, and I don't say that as an insult. I say that as a positive. They come with intensity. Both brothers come to knock their opponents out and to make large statements. But for Jermell and Brian Castaño, it really has been professional in this buildup. They both know what's at stake here. They're both confident, of course, and predicting big things, but most of their predictions, Luke, has been to the idea that this fight's not going to be easy either way. And I think that when you look at the styles of both fighters, they contrast perfectly. But yes, gentlemanly, professional. Both are here for the big prize, not so much to one-up one another. Both are looking at their opponents as the obstacle in the way of each looking to make history. And when we look at somebody like Brian Castaño from Argentina, such a great boxing lineage in there, we look at him as a champion, a very good fighter. But he wants more than that, Luke. He wants to be great. He wants to be in that lineage of Carlos Monzon, of Sergio Martinez, of Lucas Matisse, Marcos Maidana, the great Argentine fighters of past. This is a guy in Castano who's hungry to be in that club.
True or false? When you think about the dominant way to understand Charlo versus Castaño, you understand it as power, patience, and precision versus volume. True or false?
I think that's an accurate statement in a lot of ways, and that plays into what makes this style contrast so perfect. At its very core, Luke, the strengths for either fighter would, in theory, be the potential kryptonite to defeat the one they're staring across the ring against. And you love that breakdown. What you mentioned there from Charlo, such a talented, athlete, puncher, pure boxer when he needs to be. But his calling card, especially since changing trainers, aligning with Derek James, and really becoming the class of this super welterweight division, has been his accurate and deadly counterpunching style. Charlo's very efficient. He doesn't waste punches, and he looks for the right moment at the right time to really capitalize on the mistakes of his opponent and look to get him out there with one punch, similar to what he did against Jason Rosario, the unified champion coming in last fall on that pay-per-view date when Jermell bodied him literally with a hard jab to the body and dropped him, floored him a second time to get the finish. What does Castaño do? Well, he's an absolutely different fighter. Hard-charging, rugged, looks to get inside of you without question, get underneath your jab, and begin to go to the body. But, Luke, I've been echoing this all week. He's not your dime store typical brawler. There's some very refined elements to Castaño's game, not just a responsibility when it comes to defense, but he's a very effective fighter at getting off combinations inside without taking a ton of damage in return. He's got great stamina. He's a tough fighter who's proven at the elite level to be very durable. So you've got two competing forces coming together. Whoever can, flip the script and make it their own is going to have a big advantage. But Luke, as we've seen so many times when champions come together in the ring, it's not your plan A that's going to win it. It's how you adjust. It's what's your plan B, C, and D as the 12 rounds play out.
You have a guy like Castaño, much more of a volume puncher, but a guy like Charlo has a lot more, at least in terms of the professional side of things, a lot more experience. To what extent is that a factor that matters here?
I think that's fairly big. Look, let's give Castaño credit. When he moved up against Erislandy Lara just a couple years back, Barclays Center in Brooklyn, primetime lights on Showtime, the biggest opportunity of Castaño's career when he fought Erislandy Lara for a junior middleweight world title. That was a fantastic performance. He got inside the great wizard Lara, pushed him to the limit, came away with a draw that was really a flip a coin and a fight of the year contender for the action, but he made Lara fight his fight, and I think that was the key. Since then, he's blown away Wally Amatoso, a trusty, tested veteran. And then he went in there against Patrick Teixeira for the world title, the WBO strap. He had a height deficit, he had a reach deficit, but he got inside on Teixeira and proved that he's an elite world-class fighter to win that title. Has he faced someone, though, of Charlo's ilk? I think that's a big question mark coming in, because what Jermell Charlo can do is everything. I mean, at the end of the day, you're looking at a fighter who checks all of the boxes. Yes, maybe he's a little bit more reliant on his heavy counterpunching, but he's quick, he's strong. Very few fighters at the super elite level can match the same level of hand and foot speed with strength, and that's certainly what Jermell Charlo does. Charlo's battle-tested as anyone in this division, having gone through those proving ground fights against the Austin Trouts, the Erickson Lubins, even last fight against Jason Rosario. We've seen the full game from Charlo. That's why he's your slight betting favorite coming in. He's probably a little bit more skilled across the board, but no one's questioning the heart. No one's questioning the rugged durability of Castaño, who's going to put it all on the line in the toughest fight, without question, of his career. Will it be the toughest for Jermell's? It has the chance to be, I'll tell you that, Luke. That's obviously, though, an answer we can only find out when they touch gloves inside the AT&T Center on Saturday.
There was some talk at yesterday's presser about Hall of Fame, but even Charlo admitted that's probably a little bit premature. Still, BC, we've talked about it this entire run-up here yesterday and now today. The winner is the unified champion. This has not been done all that often. First time in this weight class when it gets done since the four-belt era. What kind of status is conferred upon someone in modern boxing when they unify all the titles in a respective division?
It's not a footnote. Look, it's like a capstone on your resume. It says a lot. Look, from the standpoint of, we can say in modern boxing, are there too many weight divisions? Are there too many titles getting passed around of the interim and vacant nature? At times, without question, there is. But this is an old school fight, not just in the demeanor of both guys, but that status that's at stake. I mean, one name, one face, one division, one champion. It's sort of a phrase that Deontay Wilder and a few others in the heavyweight division used to utter as we get closer in that era's, that division's renaissance the past few years into finding hopefully one champion at the end. Well, we're going to find out Saturday night who's the best super welterweight fighter in the world. What that means historically is you know, I think without question, this has the chance to be the defining fight of both fighters' careers, certainly of Jermell Charlo, who's maybe fought bigger names, bigger household names than Castaño, but hasn't fought a defending unbeaten champion who's this dangerous to him in terms of the style matchup and what's at stake. This is a win that for either fighter, Castaño or Charlo, that you raise a big flagpole on top of that mountain when you look back at your BoxRec page, at your resume years later, because it was a time where you were not just the man of the division because you were the best fighter at the moment. You had to prove it. You had to go in there against all the other champions and one by one unify and defeat them. This isn't picking up vacant titles here and there. Maybe the truest form of currency in this day and age in boxing, where there's such a proliferation of titles, is that status, undisputed champion. It's really meant more now than ever before. And I think if it doesn't put either guy in the Hall of Fame, maybe that's a little premature to say, that's a big building block in the terms of fighting for legacy. And that's certainly where both fighters are at. And, you know, Luke, Charlo is on the verge of, you know, becoming a household name like his brother and a big time star. But I love the focus on legacy. Jermell's 31 years old. He wants now the type of fights that are going to, define how we remember him. And you know, good to him for getting to this point. Good to him for cashing a few checks. Now it's about the glory, and you love to see that.
All right, we're going to get to some of these other fights on the card here, but let me ask you at least one more about this main event. In your judgment, BC, what is the best win, respectively, for each of these fighters, and why?
Well, it's weird. For Castaño, I thought maybe his best performance, you know, and certainly in his toughest fight, was that Lara fight. It was a majority draw. Could have gone either way. I certainly liked that Castaño was the one bringing the fight to Lara. That said a lot to me. He settled for a draw. Is that performance more important than when he went in there against Patrick Teixeira and won the world title? You know, probably not in terms of those stakes. Either one of those, though, will tell you exactly who Brian Castaño is and the type of fighter he is, in terms of he likes to take the momentum and grab it and make it his own. Now, Charlo, he's got a very decorated resume. Luke, you can pick through a number of those one-punch knockouts, a number of those big names he's fought and defeated. Maybe Jason Rosario was not the biggest name on his record, but Rosario defeated Julian J. Rock Williams more than a year ago, had 2 belts coming into that pay-per-view bout, and there was no question when we left that, Luke, who was the best fighter in that fight and the division at large. It was Jermell Charlo, and he knocked out Rosario with ease. Has he defeated better guys? Maybe, but that showed a lot on the brightest stage in a pay-per-view debut, exactly what Charlo was made of.
All right, well, with that, we now have to go to San Antonio to get... We'll go to San Antonio actually in just a moment. BC, I had mentioned that we were going to talk about the co-main event. Let's do that now. It is a lightweight contest, pretty close on the odds. You got Rolando Romero at about a minus 380, Anthony Yiggett at about a plus 300. But here's the big deal for folks who may not know. Yiggett is coming in on something of relatively short notice. Now, BC, let me ask the question this way. You know as well as I do, sometimes a last-minute opponent can be a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because you know you're getting somebody who hasn't had a chance to fully prepare for you. But the flip side is that the person who has been there all along sometimes has to deal with an opponent who might have a radically different style than what they were anticipating, and they may still have a better chance at victory, but it's hard to even impress in those circumstances. What do you imagine we might get between Romero and Yiggett with respect to that concern?
You know, very interesting style contrast. Look, there's a lot of questions facing Yiggett and the fact that, you know, he's coming off of a 2-year layoff and he's moving down in weight. So he's going to have to answer a lot of questions on the scale and in the ring, but he's a completely different challenge, a southpaw, more of a boxer than a puncher. So it's going to be interesting to see how Rolly Romero, who's looking to make a name for himself, not just at 135, but the whole damn sport, is going to adjust to this last-minute foe. You know, he's always going to have that big punch, Luke. He's got the swagger as well. It's going to be really fun in this co-main event Saturday to see how Romero adapts to the new opponent.
We'll talk more about this on the back end, but I believe we are ready now. So let's go down to San Antonio and throw it to the classy Jimmy Lennon Jr.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you, and we welcome you as Premier Boxing Champions presents the official weigh-in for our big night of action coming your way tomorrow night at the AT&T Center here in the beautiful city of San Antonio, Texas. And it's all brought to you by TGB Promotions and Showtime. Well, we begin our weigh-in with our opening attraction tomorrow night live on Showtime, a middleweight showdown, scheduled 10 rounds of boxing. First, we ask you to join us in welcoming the fighters as they make their way to the stage. First, from from Richmond, Virginia. He is the longtime contender known as the Chosen One. We welcome to the stage Emmanuel Alim. And now we invite his opponent to the stage at this time, hailing from Montevideo, Uruguay. He is the undefeated middleweight contender Amilcar Petty Vidal Jr. And it looks like the Chosen One is ready to step onto the scale. Middleweight title fight. 10 rounds of boxing. Welcome to the scale. With a record of 18 wins, 2 losses, he has 11 wins coming by way of knockout. The respected and battle-tested contender, the Chosen One, Emmanuel Alim. 162 pounds for Emmanuel Alim, 162. And now his opponent has a fine record of 12 wins, no losses, with 11 big wins coming by way of knockout. The hard-hitting, undefeated rising star, Amilcar Petty Vidal Jr. £161.5 pounds, 161.5 pounds with his socks on. And this fight promises to be a great one. A battle in the middleweight division. Amilcar Vidal Jr., the Chosen One, Emmanuel Alim. 10 rounds of action live tomorrow night on Showtime. And now, ladies and gentlemen, from San Antonio, Premier Boxing Champions continues our official weigh-in with a special attraction coming your way, brought to you in association with Mayweather Promotions. First, we welcome to the stage from Stockholm, Sweden, Southpaw World Rank contender Anthony "Can You Dig It, Yigit." And now we invite to the stage from Las Vegas, Nevada. He is the undefeated interim WBA lightweight champion, Rolando "Rolly" Romero. And it looks like our fighters are ready to step onto the scale at this time. First, the former Olympian, former European champion, former world title challenger. Please welcome the world rank contender, Anthony "Can You Dig It, Yigit." £140.2 pounds for Anthony Yigit, 140.2 pounds. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, this fight for the interim WBA lightweight championship, 12 rounds of action scheduled, and his opponent with a record of 13 wins, no losses, 11 wins coming by way of knockout, the undefeated interim WBA lightweight champion, Rolando "Rolly" Romero. 135 pounds even, 135 pounds for Rolando "Rolly" Romero. And fans, this is for the interim WBA Lightweight Championship. You get weighed in over the weight limit on this fight, meaning that Rolly Romero cannot lose the title on this fight, but he will be defending here for the interim WBA Lightweight Championship. All right, fans, here we go. Premier Boxing Champions presents the official weigh-in for the featured attraction of the evening, brought to you by Lions Only Promotions, TGB Promotions, Showtime, and sponsored by Geico. It is for the undisputed 154-pound championship of the world. Truly a historic main event coming your way tomorrow night here in San Antonio, Texas. First, please welcome to the stage from Buenos Aires, Argentina, the undefeated WBO junior middleweight champion of the world, Brian El Boxy Castaño. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we invite to the stage from Houston, Texas, the unified WBA, WBC, and IBF 154-pound champion of the world, Jermell Iron Man Charlo. All right, fans, here we go. Let's bring our fighters to the scale at this time. Of course, the weight limit, 154 pounds for the undisputed 154-pound WBC, WBA, IBF, and WBO championship of the world. First to the scale, the former WBA world champion, making the first defense of his current title. He is the undefeated WBO junior middleweight champion of the world, Brian El Boxy Castaño. $153.25 pounds. 153.25 pounds for Brian Castaño. And back to the scale at this time, ladies and gentlemen, representing the acclaimed boxing family from Houston, Texas. He'll be making his 8th world title appearance, the unified IBF, WBC, and WBA 154-pound champion of the world, Jermell Iron Man Charlo. 153 pounds even. 153 for Jermell Charlo. And there they are, ladies and gentlemen. Emotions run high here at the weigh-in. There will be fireworks in the ring tomorrow night for the historic, undisputed 154-pound championship of the world. Jermell Ironman Charlo versus Brian El Boxy Castaño.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You just saw it. They're now official, the weigh-ins for certainly the main card of Charlo versus Castaño. They are over, but as you can see, a lot of high emotion. At first, I thought it was between Jermell Charlo, the brother of Jermell, Brian Campbell, who joins me here on the broadcast. But now, as you can see, it's actually the man himself, Jermell Charlo, jawing with Brian Castaño, and some kind of issue between Jermell and another member of Castaño's entourage there. Brian Campbell, what do you make of it?
That was Castaño's manager, Sebastian Contorsi, who, of course, a lot of boxing fans remember from being by the side of Marcos Maidana, especially ahead of those two Floyd Mayweather fights. And I think, Luke, if we learned anything from the two Floyd Mayweather fights against Marcos Maidana, is that the Argentine boxing fans show up, and they are in play and in attendance here, raising the energy and the temperature inside San Antonio ahead of this fight. But, you know, we also mentioned coming in that the Charlos always have an edge to them and are always willing, you know, inside the ring and out, to let their voice be heard and throw down if necessary. Obviously, we can't tell what sparked that little bit of potential skirmish there between Jermell Charlo, the twin brother, and WBC middleweight champion, and the members of Castaño's team. But the fighters themselves, for the most part, kept it together. It did add, Luke, to the intensity of that stare down, and something you had asked me just moments ago. A lot of respect for both champions to each other coming in, but they can feel it in the air that it's real. This fight's going down. Both have made weight Saturday, undisputed champion. Let's do this thing.
It looked like cooler heads prevailed, and I certainly agree with your assessment, Brian. It looked to me like, you know, they don't necessarily have any animosity personally, but they got plenty of competitive animosity, and you saw that brought to a boil. Now, let's give the folks the numbers here if we can, BC. A triple header that starts tomorrow on Showtime, 9 p.m. in the East. Jermell Charlo weighing 153. We could make 154, but no more. But he made it under the weight pretty easily there. And Castaño weighing 153.25. BC, before we go to the rest of the fights here on this card, anything there? They look to be both in tremendous condition. I didn't see any issues with how they had prepared before this. The scales didn't reveal anything else. Any takeaways from that?
Well, Castaño was a little bit late arriving to this weigh-in, so we weren't sure if that was going to mean, you know, trouble for him. But not only did he make the weight, Luke, he seemed to make it with ease, coming in just over 153 pounds, as you mentioned, almost a full pound under. But more importantly, looked into be great shape, didn't look to be sucked out. And Luke, I think you saw on that stare down, I mean, there's a high confidence level here in Castaño. He understands that he has got a championship level motor, is a very durable and tough fighter, and it's good to see, obviously, that all four titles will be contested for on both sides. Both made the weight, but it was good to see both fighters looking good. You saw, it's never an easy weight cut at 154 for Jermell, but he looked strong. He looked ready to go.
He certainly did. Okay. I don't know if the shot we have here on the screen is the live one or not, but if so, the two camps are still jawing at each other, although it looks like everything will be okay. All right, let's get to some of the other fights. We did not discuss them at the top. We will circle back to the main event here in just a moment, BC. But let's talk about some controversy now coming out of the co-main event. Rolando Romero did his job as the interim WBA lightweight champion, making 135. Now, we knew that his opponent, Yigit, was coming in on late notice. Fair enough. Nevertheless, Brian Campbell, he made only 140.2. For a second, I thought that the fight was being contested at the next weight class up at light welter. No, he just missed it by basically 5 or 4 pounds if they're allowed to have for a non-title bout the 1 pound allowance. But since this was a title, you're not allowed that. BC, that is a massive. I mean, he's already in the next weight class. What do you make of a miss this big?
I mean, this is really tough to see. Obviously, there's an unprofessional nature to it. Look, this was going to be tough for Yiget no matter what. Now, he's a fairly big name from the standpoint that the native of Sweden has been known around the 140-pound division for years. We saw him in a title bout in 2018 against Ivan Baranchek, in which the fight was stopped down the stretch due to a swollen shut eye on Yiget. But my point is this. He's not only coming in, Luke, late notice, not only coming in on a 2-year layoff, but he fought almost the entirety of his career at 140 pounds. He debuted initially as a welterweight. He hasn't gone down to 135 in a long time. So this was going to be an ambitious move, last minute coming in for the title opportunity for that interim strap, which of course you'd hope would give the winner an opportunity to face the champion. And Luke, you don't have to go too far from a Rolly Romero interview to know he wants everyone, including Gervonta Davis, by the way. He considers that his dream fight. So tough to see for everyone's stake. Romero will still be allowed, of course, to defend the title. He made the championship weight of 135. Yiget will fight. There's going to have to be some financial concessions, obviously. He will not be eligible, however, to win that title, as he badly, by more than 5 pounds, came over the limit.
Yeah, so for folks who don't understand, if a opponent or one of the fighters misses weight in a contest where obviously a belt is on the line, they can still win the fight. It is still possible for Yiget to go down as having been the victor over Rolando Romero. However, even if he does that and gets his hand raised, he will not be gifted the title as a consequence. So there is a scenario.
The title would be vacant, Luke.
That's right. What I was going to say was there's a scenario where Romero doesn't have the belt. There is no scenario where Yiget can gain it. That's the sort of scenario there. And then last but not least, for the opening of the card, BC, you had Amilcar Vidal, 161.4, and then Emmanuel Alim, 162. A bit of a catch weight there, but both seem to be locked in. No issues. As you can see here in the middle of this is a live shot still of the weigh-ins here, the Argentine fans. Boy, no one ever accused the Argentinians of not being patriotic enough. They are. They show up and they show out like no one else. But real quickly, BC, they made weight here for the opener of the triple header tomorrow for Showtime Championship Boxing.
Yeah, this should be a very interesting middleweight clash. Obviously contested at the catchweight that you mentioned there, but Amilcar Vidal, Luke, not from Argentina. They're there, of course, for Brian Castaño, but from, can I pronounce this correctly? Uruguay. Luke, I grew up, it used to be Uruguay, but you tell me it's Uruguay.
Uruguay, yeah.
But Vidal is an interesting potential, title contender here. 25 years old. He's 12-0 with 11 KOs. And these aren't necessarily, 11 KOs against cab drivers in his home city. He's traveled around and he fights out of the U.S. now. This is obviously a good step up in class against a very battle-tested veteran in Alim. But it's going to be interesting to see as Vidal, as good as his record indicates. He's certainly someone that's been tabbed for a bright future. He's going to be a puncher. He gives away his height a lot because he likes to fight on the inside. But he'll go in there against Emmanuel Alim, Luke, who's a name we know a lot on Showtime, but I always feel has a deceiving record. He's just 1-2-1 in his last 4. And he can be hot and cold at times, but I think he's always one of those guys that's better than their record. He's been in part of a couple draws on the highest level, including one against former champion Matvey Korobov, where you really could argue could have gone either way or could have gone in his favor. But this is another big opportunity for him to get back in line and really prove what at times he's shown the flashes of, that he's elite in this weight class, despite a 1 year and 7 month layoff and the fact that he's coming in there, a little questionable run the last 4 fights. Is Vidal for real? We're going to find out. Alim's the perfect type of fighter to prove that for you.
Let's talk about that opener here just a little bit longer if we can. This is the one with the widest odds. Still not all that wide, certainly by boxing standards. Minus 490 for Vidal, plus 370 for Alim. Now, we talked about this yesterday, BC. Alim has been something of a tough out for fighters in the middleweight division, but I think has been out for a little while, and certainly of late has not produced necessarily his best work. Meanwhile, Vidal appears to be a dominant puncher and doesn't have nearly as many miles on him. Does that explain why the odds are, relatively speaking, so wide?
Yeah, look, you got a glossy record of a guy who's being tabbed as a title contender in Vidal, and 12-0, 11 KOs, looks very nice. He's taking care of the opponents that he should have as he's come up along the level. And when you look at Aleem, again, you can be deceived by his record. He's had some flat performances in there, but I think he's somebody that gets the most out of his ability and certainly can overachieve. Certainly is the perfect kind of threat to a guy who's either a champion or a guy who wants to be champion. So I think those odds definitely represent where we're at coming in here, especially some damning evidence of Aleem being just 1-2-1 in his last 4. But when I say that's deceiving, some of those performances are a lot closer than you realize. He's an aggressive fighter. He likes to get inside. He fights with a style as if he's a big puncher, although maybe he doesn't have the same power for the style he executes out there. He really goes after it. But Vidal is the bigger sort of bright potential here with the name and the knockouts. But, you got to earn it in there, Luke. And this is a guy, like I mentioned, Vidal's going to have a height and reach advantage. He tends to give that up, though, to get in there and get dirty and fight. So I think styles-wise, this is a very, very good matchmaking, and it's going to tell us a lot about where either man is going in the future.
All right, let's circle back to the main event there. For folks who are just joining us here on the weigh-in stream, let me give you just a very quick update. The good news, the fights are official, including your main event. And in your main event, everybody made weight. There were no titles given up on the scale. Jermell Charlo coming in at 153. Brian Castaño coming in 153 and a quarter. Brian, I want to talk a little bit more about how the fight might go. I've been reading a lot of prognostication from boxing writers and experts, and there's one sort of theme they keep coming back to. It's something we had kind of alluded to yesterday and then individually on the podcast that we host called Morning Combat. Namely, if you look at the way in which Jermell Charlo fights, it is very likely that even if he gets the win via decision or by stoppage, you're going to look at some scorecards where he's going to be giving up some rounds along the way. He is a dominant force in the division, but it's not true that fighters often find themselves in the distance being lapped by him collecting 12 rounds to nothing along the way. He gives up rounds. He just finds ways to slam the door shut later or get it done if it goes the full distance. Is that a fair assessment?
To a large degree, yes. Now, look, you wouldn't make a comparison of Jermell Charlo to a fighter like Deontay Wilder, right? Wilder is arguably the biggest slugger or one-punch knockout threat in the sport. But one thing you and I have really studied looking closely at the careers of both is Wilder, for the most part, we wonder if his strategy obviously will change in October in the third fight against Tyson Fury. But what Wilder often does is see the lay of the land for 4, 5, 6, 7 rounds, sort of wait for his opponent to tire, make a mistake, and then land that one big punch that we've seen him land so many times, including that rematch with Luis Ortiz, where you're like, wow, that the fight ended just like that. But what would have happened if it hadn't ended? I think sometimes Jermell Charlo can get a little bit too much in love with being cute in there, with trying to land the perfect punch. Now, his record is backed up that he's quite efficient, both in his punch output and his ability to get people out of there. But you do wonder if he's opening up the potential to get a bad luck situation. A lot of people thought that's what happened to him when he fought Tony Harrison in 2018. A fight that went the distance. Harrison got the unanimous edge. Many people thought that Charlo's bigger punches offset the volume and the clean boxing put out by Tony Harrison, but the judges disagreed. And Luke, there's a court of public opinion, and that's great. But there's 3 men assigned for each fight that can decide your fate, especially in a title fight, if you didn't take care of business in the 12 rounds. Now, is Jermell Charlo the favorite here? Yes. Is there a chance he could knock out Castano? Absolutely. Jermell is among the biggest punchers in this weight class, if not the biggest. But Castano's durable, and I think Charlo's going to have to be careful of doing this style that we've seen of late, whether it's Gervonta Davis or Canelo Alvarez, where you're looking to counter shot, but you're being very efficient. Now, the efficiency in that isn't always a negative thing, and I do want to state that. When a fighter like Charlo or Canelo or Gervonta is rolling and landing big counter shots at will, they're lowering the output of their opponent typically, and that's something that Charlo is going to have to do against Castano. Discipline him early with big shots that would prevent him from coming in with ease and flurrying with the type of volume that Castano is used to. The fear for Charlo here is that if this fight is competitive as we think it will, and if it goes late or potentially the full distance, you want to make sure you've done enough without question. And I think sometimes for the fighter, they can be an artist in there, Luke. They can, look at the great, some of the great Cuban fighters like a Guillermo Rigondeaux or an Erislandy Lara. Look at Lara against Canelo Alvarez a few years back on Showtime pay-per-view. I thought Erislandy Lara got the better of Canelo Alvarez. He landed the better punches, the bigger ones, the cleaner ones. But he also got outworked. And that can be a major difference depending on the strike zone, if you will, of the specific judge. That's why the jab for Charlo will be key in this one. But I think the way that you framed him, especially when you look at the CompuBox statistics, he seems to be throwing less and less as his career goes on. Now, those shots, Luke, they're powerful. They tend to change the tenor of the fight. But eventually you're going to meet that hungry guy who's not going anywhere. That turned out to be Tony Harrison a few years back, although Charlo avenged that with a vicious knockout. It's going to be interesting if Castaño can get inside, and if he can stay there, Luke, we're going to have a different kind of fight on our hands.
Charlo is already on the cusp of being a breakout star in boxing. He and his brother inch closer with every event, every win. They seem to get, they're right at the precipice of breaking through into something pretty extraordinary. But the reality is, if Brian Castaño wins, he'll be the guy that unified all the titles. He does bring one here. He'll get Charlo's in the process if he wins. How big of a transformative experience would a win over Charlo be should he emerge victorious?
I mean, it's absolutely life-changing. It's career-altering, if not defining. And look, Brian Castaño has been on Showtime before. Boxing fans, they know him, of course. You fight Erislandy Lara 12 hard rounds and have a shot at having your hand raised. We're going to know you, but he's not the close to being a crossover name like you rightfully tabbed the Charlos. Charlos are fresh off headlining their own pay-per-view last fall on Showtime and have really started with lines only and with the highlight reels that you can put together of their knockouts. They are getting noticed. They're ready for the big time. There's no question. If you're Brian Castaño and you pull this upset here, although obviously he's just a slight underdog, respectable but slight underdog, this makes his whole career. He's the man at 154, which is an incredibly deep division. So many big, fun names. The Jarrett Hurds, the Julian J. Rock Williams. I know Erislandy Lara just recently moved up to middleweight, but you hear the threats again and again that the great unified welterweight champion Errol Spence Jr. Is going to move up sooner than later to 154. We know that along with welterweight, which is long the money division, sometimes in absence of a deep heavyweight division throughout recent boxing history, 154 is never far behind. You do tend to get a lot of big name players there. If you're Brian Castaño, you are going to turn your fortunes around overnight, financially, globally. You can see already, Luke, as we mentioned at this weigh-in in San Antonio, that his fans have traveled. It's a credit to the passion for this sport in Argentina. Luke, do you remember where Marcos Maidana went directly after 2 fights with Floyd Mayweather? If you don't, I'll remind you. He walked away from the sport with a lot of money in his pocket that went a long way in Argentina, where he lived as a king. He put on a lot of weight and was happy as heck. I'm not saying Brian Castaño, who's at the prime, at the peak of his career, is set to do the same, but you get the point. This is a career life-altering opportunity for Castaño, and you better believe he's going to cash in on it if he wins and look to fight as big a name next as he can possibly gain.
A lot of chimichurri on the line for the winner. All right, let's go to the co-main event, BC. We've talked about it before. Rolando Romero, the WBA interim lightweight champion, he made the weight, 135 on the nugget, looked motivated, looked good, did not look at all like the weight cut had hurt him. It's the exact opposite for his last minute, or I should say late notice replacement in Anthony Yiggett, who came in literally up a weight class at 140.2. Okay, BC, we explained it. There is a scenario where Rolando can lose the belt. There is no scenario where Yiggett can wear the belt, although he can win the bout. Besides that, what's on the line here? Rolando trying to get a big opponent? Yiggett trying to shake things up? Is there more to it than that?
Yeah, well, look, this is a pretty loaded division right now, 135, all things considered. Most of the biggest, brightest either stars or future stars in this game operate in and around 135. Gervonta Davis, Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney, Shakur Stevenson will move up in a little bit, Teofimo Lopez. And Rolly Romero has from day one, Luke, believed he's been a part of that group, if not the best of that group. And whether you've seen his fights or you're a fan of his very brash and swaggy nature or not, he does have a great chance here in a big-time co-main event ahead of a very must-see, undisputed championship above him on the marquee to continue to make that name known. I think the problem for Rolly Romero is that, yeah, he can punch. There's no question. And you're really not going to find a more confident guy who's already predicting a first-round knockout here, has basically predicted since they put a microphone in front of him that he's the future of boxing. I love his shameless inability here to look at anything else but himself and say, I'm the man, I'm the one. But he's got to prove a few things, Luke. You talked a lot about that fight that we saw together on Showtime when he fought Jackson Marinez for the vacant title. Didn't look great. I thought he got outboxed over 12 rounds. Marinez was a hard luck loser. There was some booing in the crowd. I think for Rolly Romero, he's got to figure out and show, is he more than just a brash, big-time knockout puncher? Yes, both of those things are true. He is that. Can he box on that same level? Will that happen in this fight? It's going to be interesting. Yigit's a southpaw, just like the original opponent Austin Dulé was before he pulled out with an injury. But the thing about Yigit is, even though he probably should box more than he punches, given that he's not a big-time puncher, he tends to get a little bit aggressive, maybe sometimes too aggressive. I wonder if that's going to play against Yigit, who probably embarrassed by the situation with the weight, probably looking to make a statement. All of those things could come into play, Luke, that he could be walking into something big for Rolly Romero. So there's that potential that Romero could win this fight and could do so by knockout against a world-class contender here, and maybe not completely win us over. We're going to have to see if somebody can push him again like Marinez did to that full distance and see what we really have here. But Luke, if you're only going to go by Rolly Romero interviews to gauge how good he is, dude, he wants Gervonta tomorrow. He wants all the smoke. This guy is big-time chips on the shoulder, and I got to tell you, even though we're kind of comically, framing it, I kind of like that in a fighter.
He was bragging that he got in a car wreck and still didn't pull out of the fight, unlike his previous opponent. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's certainly an intense thing to brag about. Okay, and then the card opens tomorrow, 9 p.m. in the East for Showtime Championship Boxing with Uruguay's Amilcar Vidal at 161.4 pounds and Emmanuel Alim 162. BC, it feels like the narrative of this fight is who's coming, who's going. Alim wants to tell the promoters that y'all must have forgot I'm not to be slept on, whatever kind of hiccups may have hit my career. And Vidal is here to be like, I'm on a big card against an opponent that people on the inside know. If I can get a big win, sky's the limit. Fair assessment or not?
Very fair assessment. Vidal's the guy that they're looking at as a puncher, as a title contender, as potentially the real deal Holyfield, if you will. From Uruguay, look, we're trying to become the first world champion from that nation in boxing. And you could do a lot worse than this type of showcase setup and, tough battle-tested opponent who will push you closer in the rankings toward getting that title shot. I want to see, is Vidal's power the same? Can he carry it up to this level against a guy who's been in there with the world champions before and, has proven he can swim there? If he knocks out Emmanuel Alim, we got a guy here. We got a guy to watch at middleweight. But on the flip side, the same way, Alim is that perfect guy that can give the big names trouble, where sometimes he can tease you with those flashes. Can he become a big name himself? I sort of like that narrative coming in, especially after the long 19-month layoff for Alim. He's got a lot of questions to answer, just the same as Vidal does, about whether his power is truly world-class.
And there you have it, folks. That is the card tomorrow. Everything kicks off live on Showtime at 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West. If you have Showtime, that's where you're going to watch it. If you don't have Showtime, I have great news for you. You can get it for free. How's that sound? You can go to Showtime.com and get a 30-day free trial. If you like it, you can keep it. If not, you can move on. But I have a feeling that once you get it, you're not going to want to let that go. The fights are tomorrow, Brian Campbell, but in the main event, Jermell Charlo and Brian Castaño, they are chasing history. They are chasing a lot more, as you put it, than boxing footnotes. They are chasing an incredibly important distinction, as one of them will unify all of the belts in the four-belt era for 154 pounds. That's Brian Campbell. I'm Luke Thomas. We are the hosts of Morning Combat. You can check us out at youtube.com/Morning Combat. We'll have this fight broken down on Monday on our live show and a whole lot more coverage just the same beyond that. All right? So for Showtime, for Brian Campbell and everyone else involved, we're done here. There's nothing left but the fights themselves. Enjoy them tomorrow night. We'll see you all next time.
Al mundo de boxeo entré por mi papá. Él era boxeador profesional y yo de chiquito, él me subió al ring. Hasta ahora, gracias a Dios, nunca perdí.
I know where I'm at in this world. I am in competition with myself. I'm already at the top. At the end of the day, we're going to run into drama.
Le he ganado a boxeadores buenos, le he ganado a Errol Spence, también le gané a Sergey Derevianchenko.
Watch my opponent. He's a stalker. He comes, he throws a lot of punches. I have to go in there and figure out how to take Brian Castano away from being Brian Castano.
Ser campeón mundial creo que es la meta de todo boxeador. se me dio la oportunidad.
You know, to fight for the 4-belt era, undisputed championship, this fight does cement my legacy.
Es la oportunidad de mi vida y no la voy a dejar pasar.
July 17th, I'm gonna put my hands to use.